It is late morning on 21 August 2026, and a Russian gun is firing across the border into Ukraine from a patch of grass near Borki, 7 kilometers out, its recoil spade dug into the earth. The shelling has been coming in for a while, not the ragged, close-in fire of mortars. Something heavier and farther out, landing on Ukrainian positions with the flat, deep crack of a big gun working from well behind the contact line. The rounds arrive in ones and twos, spaced out, methodical. Somebody on the Russian side has a fire mission and is working through it. 7 kilometers north of the border, a reconnaissance UAV from the 21st Separate Mechanized Brigade is already up, climbing into the haze over the fields around Borki. Its job right now is not to strike anything. It is to answer one question: where is that gun? The machine doing the looking is a small commercial multi-rotor, the kind that has become the standard eye of this war on both sides of the line. 2 cameras under the nose. 1 optical, sharp enough to read the shape of a vehicle from altitude, count the road wheels, see the difference between a truck and a tracked chassis. 1 thermal, which does not care about camouflage paint or netting because it does not read color. It reads heat. And a gun that has been firing has heat everywhere: the barrel, the engine deck, the ground under the muzzle where the propellant gases have scorched the grass. Endurance on a machine like this is roughly 30 to 40 minutes of usable flight. The data link reaches maybe 10 to 15 kilometers in clean conditions, less when the air is dirty with jamming. That is the whole budget. 30 minutes to search a landscape of tree lines and field edges and farm tracks, and every minute of it is spent. The crew flies a search pattern along the axis the incoming fire is coming from. This is not guesswork. Counter-battery work starts with direction, the sound, the crater orientation, the fall of shot, and the direction points northeast of Borki. The drone works that corridor tree line by tree line. And then in a gap between 2 belts of trees on a patch of ground that has been driven over enough to leave tracks in the grass, the thermal picture shows something that should not be there. A long, blunt-nosed tracked hull with an enormous barrel jutting out over open ground. No turret. Just the gun, sitting exposed on top of the chassis like a piece of construction equipment. That is a 2's-5 Hyacinth-S. And it looks wrong on the screen because it is not built like a normal self-propelled howitzer. Most self-propelled guns bury their crew inside an armored turret. This one has none. It is an open mount, a 152mm cannon on a tracked chassis, breech and barrel sitting out in the air, and the hot smears drifting around the hull in the thermal picture are men working outside it. At the rear, a hydraulic spade is dug into the earth to absorb recoil, because the recoil of this weapon is violent enough to walk the whole vehicle backward if nothing anchors it. What all that exposure buys is reach. The Hyacinth-S throws a standard high-explosive shell out past 28 kilometers, and with rocket-assisted projectiles it stretches further still, and that reach is what is coming down on Ukrainian positions right now. The gun can sit deep behind the Russian line and still put steel on infantry positions, supply routes and firing points that have no tube of their own long enough to answer. It is a counter-battery weapon and a deep-fire weapon at the same time. In a sector where both sides are trying to make the other side's rear unusable, it is one of the more valuable objects on the Russian side of the line. Ukrainian sources reportedly put its value at around $4 million. What is not in doubt is the category. This is not a truck. This is a scarce, specialized long-range fire asset that a Russian artillery brigade does not have many of, which is exactly why the entire doctrine around it is built on one word: move. Artillery in this war does not survive by being armored. It survives by being somewhere else. Shoot and scoot. The gun rolls into a prepared or semi-prepared firing position, lays in, fires its mission, and leaves. Not in an hour, in minutes. The whole logic is that by the time anyone locates the position is empty and the counter-battery round is tearing up scorched grass. The reason for the urgency is that both sides can now find a firing gun fast. Counter-battery radar reads the shell's arc in flight and backplots it to the tube. Acoustic sensors triangulate the muzzle blast. And above all of it, drones, patient, cheap, and everywhere, watch the ground for the one thing artillery cannot hide, which is the moment it announces itself. So when the recon crew finds this 2's-5 still sitting in its position, still with the barrel elevated, still connected to that scorched patch of ground, they are not looking at a target. They are looking at a countdown. The coordinates go out. Strike FPVs are scrambled. Now the clock starts running on both sides, and neither side knows what the other's clock says. The Russian crew's clock is the displacement timer. However long it takes them to finish the mission, retract the spade, stow the barrel, get the engine turning and move off the position, that is how long the target exists. On a well-drilled crew, that is a small number of minutes. The Ukrainian clock is longer and harder. Launch, climb, cross 7+ kilometers of hostile air, find the gun again in a landscape that looks identical in every direction, and get a warhead into it. Every second the FPVs spend in the air is a second the crew might be spending on the road. The strike machines are short-range tactical FPVs. Battery-powered multi-rotors, 4 brushless motors on 10-inch props, a lithium pack that dumps its current in one violent burst, a flight controller holding the airframe stable while a human being flies it by hand from kilometers away. The warhead is small. The class runs 1 to 3 kilograms of penetrating charge. Terminal speed in the dive is somewhere around 90 to 130 kilometers an hour. None of that is impressive on paper next to a $4 million artillery system. It does not need to be. A TUS-5 is an open mount. Its crew works in the air. Its ready ammunition sits at the breech. A 1 to 3 kilogram charge does not have to defeat armor that is not there. It only has to arrive. The problem is arriving. An FPV of this class has no satellite navigation to lose and no inertial system to fall back on because it does not need either. It is flown live by hand on a video feed. That is its strength and its single point of failure. The radio link is the drone. Control goes up, video comes down. And if that link dies, the aircraft is a brick with a battery, which is what the Russian side is counting on. The Kursk border shoulder is one of the most electronically hostile strips of air on the entire front. Both armies have spent 2 years learning that whoever owns the radio spectrum owns the ground under it, and the result is a landscape saturated with jammers. Some are big truck-mounted stations that blanket tens of kilometers of sky. Some are small trench-level units the size of a suitcase, sitting on a parapet, running on a generator, covering one company's frontage. Around an artillery position, there will be something. Artillery is exactly what the small units exist to protect. The FPVs cross the border low. Not because low is comfortable. It is the opposite. It is the hardest flying there is, weaving between tree lines and power poles with a video feed that is barely more than a smear at that speed, but because altitude is what gets a drone seen and jammed. Down among the field edges, the terrain itself shields the link from ground emitters. The tree line that makes flying hard also makes the drone survivable. Above and behind, the recon UAV holds station, watching the gun. This is the hinge of the whole mission. The strike drones cannot see the target from where they are. The recon drone can. It is the only continuous source of truth about whether the object still exists at that spot. 3 or 4 minutes into the run, the electronic environment starts to bite. It does not arrive as an alarm. Jamming on an FPV feed announces itself as texture. The picture develops a grain. Then the grain starts moving in bands. Then the frame holds for quarter second too long, and the world in the goggles is a snapshot instead of a stream, and a snapshot at 90 kilometers an hour, 40 meters off a tree line, is how you fly into a power cable. A ground jammer does not shout the whole spectrum at once for long. It escalates. Wideband noise first, spread thin across everything, hoping to raise the floor high enough that weak links drop. If that does not work, it narrows, pours full power into the specific bands that FPVs live on, the analog video and control channels that most of these machines have used since the beginning. Concentrated power on a narrow slice is far more effective than the same power smeared everywhere. The counter is not more power. It is not sitting still. Modern Ukrainian FPV links hop across channels inside an encrypted band, jumping dozens to more than 100 times a second. The jammer locks a frequency and pours energy into it, and by the time the energy arrives, the link is 3 channels away. The feed stutters, it degrades, it does not die. That is the shape of this fight. It is not a clean victory over the jammer. It is a machine flying through a room full of shouting, catching every third word and the pilot filling in the gaps from memory and instinct. And then somewhere in that corridor the picture goes, not degraded, gone. The goggles fill with static, the way a television used to look between channels, and everything the pilot knows about where the drone is, and what is in front of it stops updating. This is the moment the mission is decided, and there is nothing dramatic about the response. The pilot does not panic turn. He holds the last known attitude and heading straight and level. On the line he was already flying, because a blind turn near the ground is how you plant the aircraft, and because a drone flying straight is a drone still closing the distance. 2 seconds. 3. The static breaks into blocks, then into a frame, then into a picture again. And the field ahead is where it should be, closer than before. Somewhere in there the drone flew out of the lobe. Jammers are not walls, they are shapes with edges and nulls and dead zones that the terrain punches into them. A hill, a tree belt, a fold in the ground, anything that puts Earth between the emitter and the antenna buys back a few seconds of link. The pilot did not find that gap by cleverness. He found it by not turning, and now the second clock speaks. Up above, the recon feed shows the gun still there, still in the gap between the tree belts, but the shape has changed. The crew is no longer working the breach. They are moving with purpose around the hull, and the spade at the rear is coming up out of the earth. The mission is over on the Russian side. They are packing to displace. This is the moment the whole doctrine is supposed to save them. Every minute of drill, every rehearsal, every hard lesson learned across 2 years of counter-battery hunting, all of it is compressed into the next few minutes of getting that vehicle off that ground and onto a track under trees. A TUS-5 in motion under canopy is a difficult target. A TUS-5 sitting on an open pad with its spade dug in is not a target at all, it is a fixture. The Ukrainian FPVs are inside the last kilometer. At this range, altitude flips from liability to weapon. The pilots climb not high, just enough to break the tree line and get the position into frame, and there it is. The long hull, the absurd length of that barrel, the scorched crescent of ground in front of the muzzle where the propellant gases have burned the grass black, a mark you could not mistake for anything else. Recoil spade half raised, engine running, figures on the ground. The first drone goes over the top of the tree belt and drops into the dive. There is a specific discipline to the last 4 seconds of an FPV attack that does not exist in any other weapon. There is no seeker, there is no lock. There is a human being watching a video image that is getting larger, holding a stick, correcting for wind and for the drift that comes with speed, choosing an aim point on a machine that is trying to leave. Aim for the hull and you might get a track. Aim for the open mount, the breech, the working space where the ammunition is handled and the crew stands, and you get the whole system. The feed fills with the shape of the gun. The barrel swings across the frame. The scorched ground rushes up, then static. That is what a hit looks like from inside an FPV. The video does not show an explosion. It shows the target becoming the entire world, and then it shows nothing at all. Because the transmitter and the camera and the airframe have ceased to exist in the same instant as the warhead. The explosion belongs to the recon drone, 600 or 700 meters above and back, and it sees everything. The strike does not end with one drone. FPVs work in sequence. One goes in, the operators read the result on the recon feed. The next one is already inbound with a corrected aim point. What the objective control footage published that same day shows, geolocated to the fields northeast of Borki, is a TUS-5 Hyacinth-S destroyed in its firing position. Not damaged, not immobilized and recoverable, destroyed. What kills the gun is not the warhead. A 1 to 3 kilogram charge is a match, not a bonfire. What burns a self-propelled gun down to its running gear is what a self-propelled gun carries: propellant charges, ready rounds at the breech, fuel in the hull. An open mount puts all of it within a few meters of the point of impact and puts nothing meaningful between them. The gun burned in the position it had refused to leave. Now the accounting, and it is the part that matters more than the footage. Russia lost a long-range 152mm system that reaches past 28 kilometers, on a shoulder of the front where reach is the entire point. Guns like that are not distributed generously. An artillery brigade has a fixed number of them, and every one that stops existing means the remaining tubes fire more, wear faster, and are found sooner. Because a battery that has to cover the same frontage with fewer barrels has to shoot from the same places more often. Attrition in artillery is not linear. Removing one gun makes the next one easier to remove. There is a second cost, harder to see and slower to arrive. Doctrine only works if crews believe it works. Every artillery crew on that shoulder now knows that the displacement window, the few minutes that are supposed to be their guarantee, was not enough for the crew northeast of Borki. Crews that stop trusting the window start cutting their fire missions short. They fire fewer rounds from worse positions with less time to lay in properly. Their accuracy drops. Their volume drops. Nobody orders that. It just happens quietly across a sector, because men who have seen a burning 2s5 do the arithmetic on their own. And then there is the exchange rate, which has become the single defining number of this war. A $4 million artillery system, by the Ukrainian valuation, against tactical FPVs that cost a few hundred to a couple of $1,000s each. Even at the top of that range, even counting every drone flown that day and the fuel in the truck that carried them, the ratio is not close. It is not a fair trade for the invader, and it never becomes one, because the cheap side of the equation is manufactured in workshops by the tens of thousands, and the expensive side takes a factory, a supply chain, and a trained crew that took years to build. Which brings the story back to where it started, to the question of why that gun was still sitting there at all. The Hyacinth-S crew was not doing anything unusual. They were firing at Ukrainian positions from a spot that would have been safe for most of the last century, 7 kilometers behind their own border, well outside the reach of anything Ukrainian infantry carries, and comfortably beyond where anyone would expect a small battery-powered quadcopter to be a threat. Distance was the plan. Distance has been the plan for artillery since artillery was invented. That is the plan that failed. Not the camouflage, not the electronic warfare, not the cruise drill. The assumption underneath all of it that 7 kilometers of Russian-held ground is a wall is the thing that stopped being true, and it stopped being true so recently that the doctrine has not caught up. The line that separates safe ground from hunted ground on this front is no longer drawn by the range of the guns. It is drawn by the range of the eyes, and by how quickly what those eyes see becomes a machine in the air. In the fields northeast of Borki, that whole chain see, decide, launch, cross, strike, closed faster than a trained crew could pull a spade out of the earth. Another invader's gun burned on the wrong side of a border it had been firing across. The Hyacinth-S fired its mission. It did not get to leave.